If you are brand new with us today, we're so glad that you're here with us. We started a brand new series about 4 weeks ago, so it's not new anymore. We wanted to talk about something that I think all of us want to know more about, and that's finding the will of God in our lives. And so what we do with a series is we just pick one topic, and we talk about it until you're just more than ready for us to move on to the next topic. And we're going to finish this series next Sunday. Next Sunday will be the last that we preach in this series. Today is week number 4. We talk about game plan. What's God's game plan for our life? What does God want me to do with our life? All of us have prayed a prayer similar to this, but maybe it sounded different. God, what do you want me to do with my life? But your prayer might have sounded more like this. God, what am I supposed to do? Well, I don't know what to do, And in a moment of panic, we just have said, God, I don't know what to do. Do I marry her? Do I break up with her? Do I marry him? Do I move out? Do I go to this college or do I go to this college? Do I take this job or do I stay at this job? Do I move to Williston, North Dakota? Well, absolutely you move to Williston. Don't even pray about that one. Do I stay where I'm at? I mean, God, what do you want me to do with my life? We want to know the will of God. I mean, all of us have prayed that prayer about different things in our life. And what we've been talking about with the will of God is a little bit bigger than do I buy the blue one or the red one, These are big decisions in life. And last week we talked about one of the biggest areas in life that we talked most about knowing the will of God was in the area of career, job, that kind of a thing. We've learned some things about the will of God. Last week as we talked about it, we talked about risk. And here's what I've learned from myself. I don't know about you, but what I have learned about risk. That if you take a step of faith with God and knowing the will of God, for some of you, as it has been for me, the biggest risk for you is being content where God has you right now because you don't like where you are right now. And to say, God, okay, I guess I'm okay with where you have me right now. To you to even admit that or to say that or to pray that, that is a risk because you're not happy where you are right now. And yet what you might miss is that where you are right now is God's plan because it is a time of preparation for an opportunity that you don't know about yet, but God knows about it. And so I think there's this longing inside all of us. We want to move ahead. We want to know the will of God. We want to do the will of God. If we knew the will of God, and I think the will of God is not nearly as difficult to discover as we make it. But there's a barrier to finding the will of God. There's a wall that we have to cross sometimes in finding the will of God. And I want to talk about one of those barriers today. One of the barriers, one of the things that hinders us from really moving ahead in any direction with God is how we see ourselves. It's how we see ourselves. You see, we are so anchored and so tethered to our past, we don't see any potential in our future. And some of that comes through choices and decisions that we made. Part of it is because of things that have been spoken to us through the years. But let me pose a question to you. What if God doesn't see you the way you see you? In fact, I could come to you today. I would love to go one by one through the congregation today and say, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. Eldon, what does God think about you? What do you think God thinks about you? And my friend down here might start going off by saying, well, I graduated like this part of the class, and I tried this, and that didn't work, so I moved here, and I had that job, and I really tried to be as good as I possibly can. And he would start, like any one of us, to start describe how he thinks God sees him based upon how he sees himself. But what if God looks at you differently than you look at yourself? We, in our quiet times, have all wondered, how does God see me? When God looks at me, how does God see me? What does he see when he looks at me? Because I know what I see when I look at me. I have a past. You have a past. And the tendency for all of us is that when we look at ourselves, we see ourselves through the lens of the past marriage that didn't work, or marriages that didn't work. We failed in marriage, so if we failed in marriage, how can we succeed in other places? We failed in relationships. We have this underlying habit, this secret within our lives that how can I move ahead? Because God, all he sees is this thing that I'm trying to keep from everybody else. And this job didn't work, and I've been through that job, and that job failed, and that relationship failed, and I dropped out of school, and then we think about our physical handicaps and limitations, and So as we would say, well, how does God see me? God must see me the way I see me. But I pose the question to you again. Is it possible that when God looks at you, he doesn't look at you the way you look at you? Is it possible that when God sees you, he sees something different than you see? And it's so hard for us sometimes to look ahead because all we can do in life is look behind us at all of the past mistakes and failings. And I alluded to this a little bit last week. There's a very famous prayer that Jesus taught his followers to pray. Jesus was in prayer all the time, and the disciples observed this, and they came to him and said, Jesus, teach us how to pray. So Jesus said, okay, here's how you pray. And he started out the prayer with these very famous two words that we could skip right over, but you know them. Our Father. Our Father. The very first way that Jesus engaged God in prayer was to say, our Father. We miss that, but I think it's possible that when our Father looks at us, he sees things that we don't see, and we'll see some scripture that would point to that in just a moment. Our Father, you know what? I'm a father. If you're a parent, a mother, or a father, and you look at your children, you don't see all of the failings of their past, regardless of their age. You don't see all of the problems they're in, and right now, when you look at your child, you know the fragrance of your child, you know the look of your child, you know everything about you know the character about your child, and you look at them and you have hopes, desires, dreams, and longings, and as a parent, you love with a different kind of love than anybody else does, and you have a tendency to just gloss over the mistakes of their life, don't you, Mom and Dad? Our Father. So when our Father looks at us, I think our Father looks at us and sees potential, longings, dreams, desires for us. What if, just entertain this question with me, what if God saw something in you that you never imagined for yourself? God is in the business of doing that. And the Bible bears that out in some incredible stories. For instance, a guy named Abraham. God came to Abraham one day and said, Abraham, I have an idea. We're going to start a nation. And guess what? It's going to begin with you. You're going to have so many children, they outnumber the stars of the sky or the sands along the seashore. And Abraham said, well, that's great, but if you haven't noticed yet, Sarah, my wife, and me, we're unable to conceive children. I know, that makes you perfect candidates. And then God waited a little bit longer till Sarah was 90 and Abraham's 100, and she was beyond the years of bearing. Like there was just no physical way that she could have a baby. But God said, I just imagined something different for you, Sarah and Abraham, than you imagined for yourself. God did it again a little bit later on in the same book when he gets this guy named Moses. Moses, I want you to go to the most powerful man in the world, Pharaoh. And I want you to go before him and tell him, let my people go. Just say it just like that. That's what I want you to do. And Moses said, but I can't speak very well. Well, I know. That's why I'm picking you. I imagined something different. Moses had a speech impediment. God imagined something different for Moses than Moses ever imagined for himself. And then God had another idea. You know what? We're going to start this movement. Eventually, people will call it church, but we want to go change the world one person at a time. And you know what? We need somebody to kind of lead this and get this started. Whom shall I pick? I know Saul, who would later become Paul. I'll pick you. Right now you're having Christians martyred for their faith, but we're going to start the church with you. Isn't that great? I think when God looks at us, God sees something that we don't see. Is it possible that when God looks at you, he doesn't see the same things that you see? God's in the business, church. Let me tell you this. God's in the business of redemption. And that means this. Regardless of your past, regardless of your present, God can take broken things and broken people and make them new and beautiful again. He is the original inventor of repurposing. Because he takes our lives with all the problems, all our past, all our mistakes, all of our shortcomings, all of our weaknesses, and he repurposes our lives, because when God sees us, he sees something that we don't see. His plan for you didn't go away with the last mistake that you made. Now, there's a great story that we're going to read in the Bible. If you brought a Bible or you want to turn in your device, we're going to go to an Old Testament book called 1 Samuel. We're going to go to 1 Samuel chapter 16, and we're going to read a story that so beautifully illustrates that when God looks at people, he doesn't see what people see. You might even know the verse that we're going to get to eventually, but it's an amazing story. Let me give you a little history of what's happening here. The nation of Israel wanted a king. They wanted a king. They wanted to be like the nations around them. They kind of rejected God as their leader, so God said, fine, you want a king, we'll get you a king. So the very first king of Israel, his name was, say it with me if you know, the very first king of Israel, his name was Saul. You were all in Sunday school. You're great. That's amazing. Saul is later rejected as king because of moral failure in his life, and his heart really abandoned God. So it's time to go find another king. Samuel, the guy who wrote what we're about to read here, Samuel is a prophet. He's the one that listens to God. He becomes the spokesperson for God to the nation of Israel. God says to Samuel, I want you to go to this little village called Bethlehem. Yes, the same Bethlehem to where Jesus would be born. In Bethlehem, I want you to go specifically to a guy's house named Jesse. And within Jesse's home, you're going to find the next king of Israel. Samuel shows up in Bethlehem. Walking into the city streets, all the people are freaked out. You can read the story, and they want to know, why have you come here? You know, what's going on? And because Samuel was this man of power. And wherever Samuel went, they knew something was going to happen. So Samuel walks into Bethlehem. He goes to Jesse's house. I don't know what the house looked like. I would imagine it was built of stone, with a thatched roof, perhaps sod on the roof, as many Middle Eastern villages would have been built. Small windows and perhaps one large room with maybe one or two smaller added onto the sides. Samuel gets to Jesse's house, and he says, Jesse, look, I'm looking for the next king. I know that you have some sons. I want you to bring your boys in here so that we can look at them, and I just want to hear from the Lord whom our next king should be. And I don't know about you, but we all kind of know what a king should look like. I mean, we've seen it on TV, right? I mean, a king is big and tall and handsome. His shoulders are squared back and his chest is out. And he is a man of stature and dignity, and he just has the look of a king. Probably has black hair, fair skin, and piercing blue eyes, right? Because we've all, whatever movie you watch, I don't know. I would imagine Samuel's thinking the same thing as he walks into Jesse's house. The story goes like this in 1 Samuel 16, beginning in verse 6. Samuel saw the first boy of Jesse's. His name was Eliab. And he thought to himself, surely the Lord's anointed stands before the Lord. I mean, this is a slam dunk. That's a sports term that goes along with our theme, even though it's not football. This is a no-brainer. I mean, just look at this guy. Look at this guy. Look at him. He is king from head to toe. I mean, from everything to the human understanding, everything that we would look at with the human eye, I mean, the appearance says king. God whispers to Samuel in verse 7, Samuel, don't consider his appearance or his height, for I've rejected him. Not rejected him as a man or an individual. He's just saying, look, this is not the king. So he should just walk on by. Just walk on by. And then before he even gets further into the search process for a king, it's almost as if this godly man Samuel needs to be reminded of something by God that maybe he knew but needed to be reminded of. Verse 7 says that the Lord does not look at things people look at. See, people look at the outward appearance, and boy, how we know that to be true. But God looks at the heart. Aren't you glad that God knows you different than people know you? It also tells me that God knows you different than you know yourself. We all know what it is. There's this thing about the king. Outward appearance. It's happened to you. The outward appearance. It happened to you in third grade, didn't it? You were on the playground. Team captains were chosen. We all know who the team captains are going to be. It's the popular ones. It's the ones who are given authority just by the virtue of what they look like or maybe what family they come from. And we all stood on the playground in that awkward moment when team captains begin to choose teammates. And if you were in the first round, you were so thankful. And the longer the process of waiting went to be chosen, the more painful it began. You applied. You hoped to be recognized for a promotion, an award, the employee of the month. You wanted to be noticed in school. You wanted to be noticed in the workplace. Oh, you were hoping that you would get some notoriety because like anybody wants to be accepted. We all want somebody to recognize us for what we're good at. But you didn't get it, did you? They got it. It was so hard to be happy for them. And one thing that all of those chosen people had in common is they were people of social standing, or their parents were doctors or lawyers, or they were pretty, or their family had a lot of money. And you just pined away aching in the privacy of your life, thinking, why doesn't somebody notice me? There's got to be something in here. This verse says that God sees it. If people miss it, God sees it. And God will do something with it, as he will in the story that we keep reading. Well, Eliab and Abinadab, Eliab is not the man. Verse number 8 says, Jesse called Abinadab, another one of his boys. Moms, if you're thinking of boys' names here, Abinadab is a great boy's name, I think. He had Abinadab pass in front of Samuel. Samuel said, no, the Lord hasn't chosen this one either. Then in verse 9 it says, Jesse then had Shammah pass in front of Samuel. Samuel says, no, this isn't the guy either. I wonder how it is for Samuel. Am I hearing from God, or am I missing the voice of God? Samuel writes these words that we're reading here, and he kind of speeds up the process a little bit in the story, because verse 10 says, Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. But Samuel said to him, the Lord has not chosen these. I mean, we've had 7 go by so far, and God, I was kind of waiting for like a trumpet blast from heaven and a ray of light to just come shafting through the window as these guys come walking through the living room here. And I mean, Eliab, it was just obvious. Eliab had king written all over him. I mean, just look at the guy. And then Abinadab, well, he's not ugly either. And Shammah, and then all the rest of the other boys. And I'm just not hearing anything going on until verse number 11. Samuel says, are these all the sons that you have? Verse goes on, Jesse says, well, there's still the youngest, I guess. He's out tending sheep. I wonder how Jesse said it. There's still the youngest. He's out tending sheep. Yeah, there's one more. Don't you have any more? Yeah, there's one more, but I mean, you wouldn't want him as king. I mean, if you didn't like these guys, you sure don't want him. He's young, really not that great looking, and he smells like sheep. I mean, he's not even in the running. He's not even a consideration. If I had all my boys, all 8 of them lined up before you, you just gloss right over him and just go on probably back to Eliab again. I mean, he's not king material. And as you read the rest of the verse, Samuel says, well, look, send somebody to go get him. We're not sitting down until he gets here. I don't know where the youngest, his name is David, is tending the flock. I don't know if it was at the edge of town. I don't know if it was 2 miles down the road. But boy, what an awkward moment. He got these boys standing there with Dad and Samuel and don't really know each other. We're not sitting down until David comes back. I can imagine they're standing around the living room, probably pulled out their phones and started checking mail. And Facebook and just waiting for the youngest to come back. Well, verse 12 says, Jesse sent for him and had him brought in. Here's what he looked like. I don't know what this looks like. He was glowing with health. I think, personally, my interpretation, I think he was a little overweight. How many are with me on that? Okay? All right. And he was handsome in appearance, in features. And then we could almost miss the importance of the next words. The Lord said, rise and anoint him. This is the one. The Lord said. Samuel didn't say. Jesse didn't say. Eliab, Abinadab, Shammah, they didn't say. The Lord said, this is the one. The Lord said, this is the one. God had a totally different view of David than his brothers and his dad. This is the king. You see, when God looks at you, I don't know how you see you, but I see how God sees you. And God looks at you and there's a task at hand. There's something ahead of you. There's some great, great dream and vision that God would have for any one of us. And you say to yourself, well, I couldn't possibly do it because you know my past. You know that I was into adultery. You know that I was into drinking. You know that I was into drugs. You know the bad relationships. You know the 1, 2, 3 marriages that I've been in. You know my secrets. You know all the stuff about me. And God says, nope. You're the one. The Lord says you're the one. It's not about what humanity says. Humanity's opinion of you doesn't mean anything compared to the opinion of God the Father, our Creator and Maker. You're the one. The Lord said, you're the one. You're the one. You matter because I say you matter. God, when He looks at you, doesn't see what you see when you see you. And it's what people have said. It's what you have said over and over and over in your mind that you think is the opinion of God and everybody else. Well, you've written a book about your own opinion, haven't you, of yourself? You know what page numbers to find all of the bad things on. You know exactly where to find it. And if somebody would say, well, how do you think God sees you? Oh, you'd know. You'd just go right to the chapter and right to the page. And you could say, this is what I think God thinks. Which leads us into this game of comparison. Oh, comparison is a wonderful tool of the enemy. Because when we compare ourselves with other people, we always come up with the wrong conclusion. It's always the wrong conclusion because either we're better than somebody or we're far worse than somebody else. And the problem is that we are comparing ourselves to other people by the wrong standard. Because the Lord said, this is the one. It's not about people's opinion that really matters. Yourself. And you know how you see yourself, don't you? Because you have painted your mind and you've painted your heart with a brush, dipped into all of the sins and mistakes of your past, done to you and by you, and you begin to paint your life with that brush. So, you start to look at yourself through that lens, the abused or the abuser, the adulterer, the sinner, the thief, the liar, the habitual whatever. And that surely must be how God sees me. And so that's the way you see yourself. Your own physical limitations. Why would God choose me for such a task? I share the same struggles. I serve on a college board, and I was really wrestling with going to the last college board meeting that I was in. You walk into the boardroom. I shared this with my wife, and I said, honey, you go in the boardroom, and there are officials from our movement over the states of Wyoming and South Dakota, North Dakota, Minnesota, Illinois, Nebraska. There's businessmen there that are worth millions and deal with millions. Walk into that room. I'm the blind preacher from the Bakken. and I'm supposed to sit down and pretend like I don't have a handicap, and like I have some value in all of this. And I know something in my mind that I don't always know in my heart. And here's what I know in my mind, that the other men who walk into that same board meeting have all the same insecurities that I do. Because we are in the habit of drawing opinions about one another and thinking that our opinions are the opinion. But in our story, the Lord said. For some of you, you can quote the words of your father. You say, yeah, Pastor, you say, our father. You know what my father was like? My father told me that I wouldn't amount to anything. He told me I was worthless. Now, my dad didn't say that. Maybe your dad did. My mother. I can still quote for you verbatim what was said. I could take you to the location. I could tell you the time of day. I could quote it. So you tend to see yourself. I was only ever good for. And so I figured for the rest of my life, that's all I'll ever be good for. And you fill in the blank. But what if God doesn't see you that way? What if with all of the mistakes and the problems and the difficulties and the wrong choices you've made, what if this is a reality? There's a place in the Bible, I think it's John chapter 3, verse number 16, that says, God loved you so much, even when you made all of those mistakes, that he sent his one and only son to die for you. What if you realized you have so much value, that you are so valuable to God, regardless of your past, regardless of what you've done or what's been done to you, that regardless of all of that, God would still send his son Jesus to die for you. I think nothing proves our value to God more than that one single act. You are so valuable to God, to his economy, his plans, his goals, his dreams, that when God looks at you, he sees potential, plans, dreams, redemption. We can take old and make it new, because when God sees you, he doesn't see you the way you see you. Proof in the pudding was through the act of sending his son, Jesus Christ, into the world. The sins that make you feel so guilty and so unworthy of being used for anything, of finding out, or even asking what is God's will for your life. But imagine this, if you would just start to pray, God, show me your will for my life. Show me your will, how to be the best grandparent that I can be. Show me your will, how to be the best parent I can be. To know when to take things up and when to lay them down. God, help me to be the best employee that my boss has ever had. Lord, show me your will. God, I want to know, how am I supposed to act when I get to school tomorrow? I'm going to walk through the doors of the school. Nobody knows the fear and intimidation I feel. God, I just want to know your will for my life. Help me to just navigate through Monday in 8th grade, you know? God, what is your will for my life? What if we would start to recognize and see that God doesn't see you the way you see you? Can you imagine how different your life might look and feel if you started to pray this prayer a little bit more often? God, what's your will for my life as a parent? I've got these precious children in my house. Lord, I need to know how to parent them. What do I do? God, begin to show me. God, just help me navigate through big choices in life. The first prayer that you need to pray, however, is, God, I invite you into that. God, I invite you into this. God, I invite you into my heart. I invite you into my will because I've been doing my will. Lord, I invite you into my will because I want my will really to be your will. That's the first prayer. Imagine how different this nation would feel and look if, as a nation, people around the country started to pray this prayer, God, show me your will for my life. Imagine if our president on public TV bowed his head on national television and said, God, show us your will for us as a nation. How do you think it would feel as a country? How do you think it would feel in your home if your children saw you bow your head and say, God, I just want to know your will for leading my family? First prayer that you need to pray again, God, I invite you into my life. I've lived my will. Now it's time to do your will. Next week, we'll just bring some conclusions to everything that we've talked about for the last few weeks. I don't know where this lands in your heart today, how we see ourselves. Maybe you see yourselves as a mistake, a failure. You see yourself through the lens of your past and all of your shortcomings. You think, how could God do anything with that? But God is in the business of redemption, making broken things new and beautiful again. Finding the will of God is not based upon your looks, your talents, your abilities. It's really based more on just having a heart open to God and saying, Lord, here am I. That when God asks for volunteers, you're the first to raise your hand and enjoy the ride. Let's pray.